One of the great historical brands in the video game industry is Atari. The company was right there at the outset and is still going strong more than 50 years later. I had a chance to speak with Wade Rosen, who is the CEO of Atari, and we talked about a variety of topics, including the areas that he's focused on right now so that Atari can be successful.
The three main ones are games, hardware, and licensing, both through organic and inorganic growth.
What about the hardware side of it? Obviously, that's an important component for any company, especially in this industry.
Yeah, well, the hardware for us is a little bit different than most because, for example, the 2600 Plus, which we just announced about a month ago, is a new 2600 that plays both 2600 and 7800 games. It's digital output, HDMI compatible. Nothing really existed like that, and it plays the original cartridges. So that would be an example of a hardware project that we're pursuing today.
That I think is an interesting component is bringing in some of the legacy games that people of my age know and bringing them forward to what you want to have today. What's that process like?
Well, it depends. It depends on if we're remastering the games, like we do in our Recharge series, if we're reimagining them, like we do in our upcoming Lunar Lander Beyond, or if we're displaying them in historical context, like in Atari 50. But in the case of the 2600 Plus, it's really just making them accessible. I think a lot of people had Atari carts sitting in their attic or in a closet somewhere, and it was a pretty common refrain that people would say, "Oh, I'd love to be able to play those," but it was nearly impossible to get an old console working. So in this case, it's just allowing people to play what they already have.
Do you see an element of parents passing this legacy down to their kids as you move forward here?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's certainly a big part of the intent. I always joke that Nintendo's they're the masters because I pay them for the privilege to teach my daughter about Mario and Zelda, and so her like she loves Mario because I love Mario, and it would be amazing if something like that also were to happen with parents, and I think there certainly is some of that, and we're trying to increase the opportunities for people to do that.
So obviously, it's not just only a console world. Obviously, with smartphones and other devices out there, how much do you focus on that side of the industry, either now or in the future?
Yeah, I think mobile for a long time was really dominated by free to play. It was hard to find much. There wasn't a lot on the premium side there, and we primarily make premium games. We do have one very successful mobile game called Roller Coaster Tycoon Touch that we continue and is always new content coming out for. But I think that's changed a little bit too, thanks to players like Apple, Netflix, Crunchyroll. They're providing content for mobile phones, but it's introduced more in a premium fashion. So I would say up until recently, we've been pretty limited, but I'm really intrigued by where mobile's heading. I think it's having a rebirth
One of the
through those
things
platforms.
one of the things we've talked a lot about on our show recently is about brand and the strength of brands, and certainly for
Mhm.
people in this industry, Atari is such a brand that they remember. How much do you focus on the brand and the strength of it as a component of continuing to build the company out here in 2023 and beyond?
As much as we possibly can. I think part of what is so intriguing about Atari, and one of the reasons I think a lot of us are here, is the brand. It's the name. There's really it's in one of the logos is one of the top 10 recognizable logos in the world. The brand is very resonant. It feels at home in both the past and a retro sense, but also on skyscrapers and Blade Runner. And so, yeah, I think the brand is incredibly timeless, and we try to incorporate it in everything that we do, as long as it doesn't become obnoxious.
What does that mean for you as the CEO of the company? Is there an element that impacts how you think about where the company is going and your thought process of leading this company?
Um, yeah, I think to some degree, I think the history. It's impossible to fully ignore the history of the company. I mean, it's such a like a historic and I think the biggest thing for us is that it's not, there was the rise and fall with
Yeah.
Atari. And so for everybody here, it's fun because it's an underdog story. We get to try and rebuild something back that has never been able to really emerge back in a meaningful way. And I've also never had the opportunity to be a part of a company where everyone's rooting for you. I mean, it really is, especially in like pop culture. Uh, People just want to see Atari. They want to see it succeed. And it's really fun to read the comments section after you introduce a new product and just realize like, oh man, this is people have a very emotional, tangible connection with this, and we get to be a part of it.
And
It feels really cool.
And so, how then do you approach trying to build that connection? Obviously, in this world of digital and social media, there's certainly a lot of opportunities out there to try and continue to
Mhm.
build that connection.
I think we try and do it all. I mean, certainly digital and press releases, but it even some of our larger releases go through more traditional channels, um, radio, obviously, and then trade shows or big exhibits. We just recently um, did PAX, and we were at Gamescom, and we're gonna be going to pretty much all the major trade shows throughout the year. And I think that's where we get to interact in the most personal way with fans.
Yeah, and I would imagine that a lot of your people that go to those shows end up having stories of connections with people coming up and say, "I remember when Atari." Those stories that
Totally.
get passed on from generation to generation.
Yeah. No, in fact, I think my favorite example is at the last one. There was a woman who uh, took one of the 2600 cards and gave it to her daughter. And was like, "This is what mom wants for Christmas." And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we're going for there.
So, where do you see then the path for Atari moving forward in the next few years? Where do you have to focus? And I guess to what level are you looking to build this company out as you go forward?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to understand is the macro video game environment is challenged right now. Much like technology, overgrowth during COVID, there's been a pullback after COVID. So what works is when you can find something that you can do better than anyone else. If you can, and I think that's what we always challenge ourselves. Like, what can Atari do that's better than anyone else? The 2600 Plus is obviously an example of that. Our recent acquisition of Night Dive Studios, which focuses on remasters of classic games, is another example of that. And I think we're just going to continue to focus on where we can be the most meaningful company. And at this point in time, that's in innovative retro hardware, software, licensing, anything in that space. That's really where we're going to put our time and energy. Will it grow beyond that? Will it be more than that someday? I'd love to say it would, but for now, it's enough to just be great at this like little niche that we play in.
Is it interesting to use the word retro when you're talking about the video game industry? Because, I mean, there is such a great history of all different companies and games, but so much is, in the here and now as well.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is interesting. I think with Atari, you can't avoid it. I think Atari. I think Atari is. It will always have one foot in the past and one foot in the future, and so it just feels very natural for us. But it's more retro. Isn't just releasing old games. I think that's where we get into trouble. Like the best example would be Atari 50, which was a title we put out last year. It was designed to give context to all these games. So it's actually a historical document. It's as much of a documentary as it is a game. You see video footage, the developers talk about the titles, and then you can dive in and play Asteroids. So it's not just playing a classic game. You're also understanding everything that went into
Yeah.
it and getting to see it. And I think that's really where that's going. I think people want context around these old titles.
One of the other areas I know that in just kind of watching this from the outside is that you get a lot of companies within this industry that want to connect with another big brand, something
Mm.
that's very successful in the entertainment sector. In fact, I think if I remember correctly, the old Atari did that back in the day. Does that factor into your thinking? Maybe not now, but down the road as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for example, we did a collaboration with Lego this year for the 2600 set, which was amazing. That's like a really awesome thing to do. We've done collaborations with luxury brands, but we're constantly working on that, and that's a big part of the licensing part of the business, and a lot more to come on that front for sure.
What are you most excited about right now for what this company is doing?
I think, I mean, what most excites me is the team that we have. I think they're amazing. It's just this really talented, passionate group of people who care deeply, and there's so much room to run that. Uh, yeah, I think that's what excites me the most is the team that I get to work with every day. I know it's a little cliche, but it's the truth.
No, that's absolutely the case. And so does also do you factor in things like AR, VR, and AI as you're moving down the road as well?
Oh, absolutely. You know, we released a VR game this year called Pixel Ripped, which is you get to not only like go in these large virtual worlds, but you're a developer at Atari, Pixel Ripped, and so Pixel Ripped 1979. And I think VR, it's one of those things that will continue to evolve, and it'll get better and better. And I think people will. I think it'll become a larger part of gaming as the technology becomes simpler and simpler.
This is obviously an amazing time in terms of your industry. I think when you think about just the connection that we have in the digital space and big tech and the growth of where we were even maybe just a decade ago with the video game industry. How much bigger do you think this industry can get as we move forward?
I mean, you know, if you were to look at a chart of where the industry is today versus where it was in 2019, it's if you pull out COVID, it's on the exact trend line that was predicted where we were in 2019. So it has grown pretty significantly since 2019. I think where it gets into trouble is, you know, COVID kind of reset the bar a little bit. But I think in terms of the size of the industry, I think it'll continue to have, you know, pretty strong compounding growth year after year. But I think the real change is like when games start to merge into social, when they start to merge into other things. You know, that the cliche is the Ready Player One analogy,
Sure.
but it'll probably come to some degree or another. And I think that's when it makes the next big leap. But up until then, I think it can continue to grow pretty steadily year after year. But I think the idea of it growing 15% a year or something like that just probably isn't that feasible anymore, given the maturity of the industry.
So, what do you think will be kind of the lasting memory of the time of COVID when you think about the video game industry and obviously everybody being in and playing more video games? How will that be looked back on? Do you think?
I think we'll look back holistically on COVID as a time of overinvestment. I think it was the end of cheap money, and at the same time, a rise in demand on a lot of goods and even some services, but mostly goods, and video games being one of those. So you put those two together, it kind of creates a very small window of explosive growth in certain sectors that is not sustainable. So I think we'll look back at COVID and kind of the learnings from it will be obvious, even though nobody was saying it during, or not many people were saying it during COVID. You know, like, and we already see that with technology, with a lot of media companies, and with video games, and the same thing is hitting all of them.
It sounds like the reception from the consumer base in general has been very positive for you and for Atari as you're working moving forward here.
Oh yeah, I mean that is the best part of the job is that, you know, the fans want Atari to succeed, and just general pop culture wants it to succeed. So when you're there, there's never a question if you should be there or not. There, it's more of like, where have you been, and why weren't you here sooner?
That's you know what that's and again as somebody who's in my mid 50s I could say you know what it is interesting to see how we have seen and I saw the growth of some of these companies 30-40 years ago, and it felt like maybe there was a little bit of a dip at some point going back to maybe the time of the financial recession through 2019. but now it seems like it's full speed ahead right now with this industry.
With video games specifically.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm glad it comes off that way. It certainly isn't the case in the industry. In fact, the industry is kind of in retreat a little bit, just in terms of growth, because again, many companies doubled or tripled headcount during COVID. So everything is still up significantly over 2019, but from where we were in 2021 or 2022, um, most companies have pulled back, layoffs, and sometimes studio closures, sometimes companies shutting down. I actually think the industry is going through a little bit of a right sizing, just holistically at the moment.
Wade, pleasure to meet you. It sounds like
Yeah, Dan, thank
you
you.
guys are doing fantastic things as Atari builds the brand back up again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
You got it. Wade Rosen, who is the CEO of Atari.